The disused train station outside Wirabara had long been forgotten, just another relic of wartime logistics. Sun-bleached and swallowed by weeds. For most, it was an empty shell. For Thomas Briggs, a quiet railway repairman nearing the end of his career, it was merely another job. His task was to inspect a series of dormant signal lines and underground service corridors. He'd expected dust and rust, he hadn't expected history. The tunnels beneath the platform were narrow, the air stale and heavy. His boots echoed softly on the old stone as he made his way past crumbling fuse boxes and collapsed benches. Then, while checking a warped section of wall deep under the western platform, his hammer struck something hollow, something wrong. The bricks sounded different, newer, as if they were hiding something. Driven more by instinct than duty, Thomas chiseled through the wall. It gave way to reveal a sealed metal door, rusted but intact. There were no handles, no signage, no record in his maintenance schematics. He pried it open. Behind it, a narrow crawl space, barely lit by the sliver of his flashlight. Dust thick as ash. A sharp metallic scent beneath it all. At the far end, something glinted. It was a wristwatch. Military issue. The face cracked, the leather band stained with a faded, dried red, undeniably blood. Thomas turned it over, heart quickening. On the underside, a name etched into the metal, worn but legible. P.T. David Renner, 1943. Thomas blinked. He knew the names carved into the town's war memorials. He'd read the honor rolls at the RSL club. David Renner wasn't one of them. Disturbed, he scanned the space. It wasn't just the watch. Scratch marks lined the wall. A single rusted boot. Faint tally marks etched into the stone, like days counted in captivity. This wasn't a storeroom. It was a cell. Back in daylight, the unease grew heavier. Thomas searched the name through every local and national military record he could find. There was no Private David Renner, no deployment, no birth, no casualty. It was as if he never existed, as if someone had scrubbed him from history. But Thomas had the proof. In his hands, he held a blood-stained artifact from a man who wasn't supposed to be remembered. And that meant something else. Someone had made sure of it. Whatever happened beneath the Wirabara platform wasn't just forgotten, it had been buried. Erased, sealed in the dark. But now, after more than 40 years, it had come loose. The first tremor, the first crack. And Thomas Briggs, with nothing more than a flashlight and a repair log, had just stumbled into a war story. No one had permission to tell. Not yet. Thomas Briggs had never thought of himself as a man for mysteries. He liked certainty, tight schedules, the hum of rail beneath his boots, the weight of tools in hand. But after finding that blood-stained watch beneath the Wirabara platform, sleep no longer came easy. His thoughts returned again and again to the engraved name, David Renner, and the silence surrounding it. It wasn't just that no one remembered the man, it was that no one could, like a hole carved into the past. He began asking around. The local council archives turned up nothing. At the war memorial, a volunteer shook her head. No Renner. Not on the plaques, not in the guest logs, not even on the black and white enlistment photographs pinned near the doorway. Thomas tried the town library, then the National Archives in Adelaide. Still nothing. The system offered polite responses, no record found, no military data available. It was as if David Renner had never lived. Frustrated, Thomas contacted a military historian he found mentioned in a newspaper column, Dr. Elsie Harrow, known for her work on wartime cover-ups and ghost battalions. They spoke over tea in her modest Adelaide office, a clutter of maps and redacted files. There were units, Elsie said carefully, tasked with things no one wanted written down. When soldiers refused, disobeyed, or embarrassed command, they were sometimes unremembered. Not executed officially, just disappeared, buried in sealed tunnels, burned from the ledgers. Thomas mentioned the station, the watch, the tunnel. Her eyes narrowed. That line was part of the Northern Freight Channel, she said. During the early 40s, there were rumors. A military transport went missing. No wreckage, no report. A group of 5, I believe, and then nothing. She offered him an old manifest from a supply train that never reached its destination. 5 soldiers listed, one name faded from water damage, the others scratched out entirely. Back in Wirabara, Thomas visited the local RSL hall. Most patrons waved him off politely, others ignored him altogether. But one man, old, bent, wrapped in layers though the sun beat down, watched him closely. "You found it, didn't you?" the man asked, voice brittle. "Found what?" Thomas replied. The man looked toward the old station, barely visible over the treetops. "There are ghosts in that dirt. The kind with boots. The kind with secrets. I was a clerk then. I stamped papers. I never read 'em. But I remember the screams came from nowhere. At night. No train ever passed through." That night, Thomas dreamed again. Men in uniform. Bound hands. Muffled cries. A tunnel that kept stretching, darker and deeper, until it ended in silence. He woke with a name on his lips, one he didn't know before. Renner. The name wasn't just missing, it had been erased. Intentionally. But now, it had surfaced. And Thomas had no intention of letting it sink again. The next morning, armed with a crowbar, a headlamp, and a printed copy of the faded supply manifest, Thomas returned to the old train station. The sun barely touched the platform as he descended into the darkness once more, retracing the path to the sealed section where he'd found the watch. The air was heavier now, wet, metallic. He followed the cracked tiles and rusted bolts deeper into the earth until the tunnel wall forked a narrow gap where stone had begun to erode. It hadn't been visible before. Squeezing through, Thomas entered a space untouched for decades. The tunnel expanded into a hidden chamber reinforced with timber beams, scorched by time, and soaked with silence. Along one wall, he found the carvings, dozens of names etched into the brick with shaking hands. Some barely legible, others crossed out violently. Next to them, crude tally marks counted off unknown days. Beneath the names, the word mercy scratched over and over. At the far end, covered in layers of dirt, was a locked box. The lock gave way easily. Inside were fragments of lives, a rusted Webley pistol, a bundle of faded dog tags, and a leather-bound journal, its pages stiff with age and blood. Thomas opened it with reverence. The first entry was dated August 1, 1943. It began, "We refused to shoot them. Civilians. Unarmed. Command said we were weak. Said we'd answer for it. They took us. We haven't seen the sun in 4 days." The writing grew erratic as the entries continued. The 5 soldiers had been accused of insubordination during a training exercise near the Pacific Front. But instead of a court-martial, they were shipped back, hidden from records, and locked underground. One entry chilled Thomas to his core. "I heard Renner praying last night, not for himself. For the officer who ordered the killings. Said we had to remember, even if they erased our names, we were right not to obey." Thomas sank to the ground, the journal in his lap. These weren't deserters, they were witnesses. Silenced because they'd chosen humanity over cruelty. Soldiers punished, not for cowardice, but for conscience. He took photos. Every name. Every page. He pocketed the dog tags and the journal, then sealed the box and buried it deeper into the corner. A crude form of protection. As he made his way back, the tunnel seemed to breathe around him. Each footstep echoed like a drumbeat. Behind him, he thought he heard movement, just a whisper, just enough to make him look back. Nothing. But as he reached the sealed metal door again, he paused. On the concrete wall, where nothing had been before, there were new scratch marks. 4 lines. Then one across them. A tally. He didn't leave that night. He camped near the tunnel, guarding it. They had been buried once. Not again. The following week brought no rest. Thomas returned to Adelaide to meet Dr. Elsie Harrow again, placing the journal, the photographs, and the tags on her cluttered desk like relics exhumed from another century. She read in silence, her eyes wide with the weight of what she held. These men, they didn't vanish, they were sacrificed, she said. The journal detailed 5 soldiers: David Renner, Malcolm Fry, Eli Dawson, Jacob Rowe, and Theo Marsh, all sentenced in secrecy for refusing an order to execute unarmed prisoners during a training operation. There had been no trial, only sealed directives, only silence. Elsie compared the journal entries to classified correspondences she had long suspected existed. The paper trail, though faint, aligned. Official files claimed the unit was reassigned after a disciplinary transfer. No follow-up. No burial records, nothing. As Elsie began drafting a report, she suggested Thomas bring the evidence to a national news outlet. He drove to Adelaide's largest paper and met with an editor. The man was cautious but intrigued, agreeing to publish an exposé. But 3 days later, the paper was bought out. The article was pulled. Calls to the editor went unanswered. When Thomas returned to Wirrabara, his front window had been shattered. Spray painted across his garage door were the words, "Let the dead stay buried." He filed a police report, but nothing came of it. That night, while going through his mail, he found an envelope without a return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, no threats, just a list of names including his own. All 5 soldiers: Dr. Harrow, the editor, him. Someone was watching. At the local RSL club, Thomas confronted one of the older veterans, a retired major who had been cordial until now. The man turned cold. "You think you're the first to dig?" he said. There were others, students, journalists. All thought they'd rewrite the past, but the past doesn't want to be rewritten. They were heroes, Thomas snapped. No, they were embarrassments, and in war, embarrassment is more dangerous than the enemy. Later that night, Thomas sat in his workshop, recording everything. His voice low, deliberate. Naming the 5 men, reading from the journal, recounting the threats. He made 4 copies and mailed them across the country to journalists, activists, a historical justice foundation. "If I disappear," he said at the end of the tape, "let this be the stone they couldn't bury." Outside, wind rustled the dry gums. Somewhere in the distance he thought he heard boots. Steady. Marching. He didn't sleep that night. The dead had waited long enough. And now, the living were listening. They came at night. Not with sirens or threats, but with concrete trucks and silence. Thomas watched from the shadows of the eucalyptus trees as 2 men in high-vis vests began sealing the tunnel entrance beneath the old Wirrabara station. By morning, there would be nothing left but soil and memory. The chamber, the names, the marks erased again. Just as they had planned. But this time, the silence wouldn't hold. Weeks earlier, the packages Thomas mailed had reached their destinations. His voice low and unwavering played across laptops and tape decks in newsrooms and history departments. The photographs of the journal, the tags, the scratched stone walls, the tally marks. The recordings spread, slowly at first, then virally. Someone posted his entire dossier on a public archive. Forums lit up. Veteran groups argued. Historians demanded access. It could no longer be hidden. A month later, under public pressure, the Department of Defense launched an internal review. At first, they denied everything. Then they conceded record anomalies. Then finally, they admitted, 5 soldiers listed as reassigned had never been seen again after August 1943. A parliamentary inquiry followed. And with it, names. David Renner. Malcolm Fry. Eli Dawson. Jacob Rowe. Theo Marsh. Their names were engraved into the granite wall at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. Not as deserters, but as soldiers lost in service, buried not in soil, but in secrecy. The ceremony was small. Rain threatened, but held. Thomas stood near the back, his coat heavy with mist, the bloodied watch nestled in his palm. He did not approach the dignitaries or reporters. He was not there for them. He was there for the 5. And for memory. A month later, back in Wirrabara, he returned to the station. The platform had been cleared. A bench freshly painted. A small plaque newly bolted to the rail wall. It read, "In memory of 5 Australian soldiers who chose humanity over orders. Forgotten by history. Remembered by truth." Beneath it were the 5 names. Thomas knelt and placed the wristwatch beneath the plaque. Its leather band was stiff, the blood still visible. Then he lit a candle. The flame danced in the soft evening wind, flickering against the old brick. For a long time he didn't speak, he just sat, letting the quiet settle. Boots marched in the distance, not real, but remembered. Echoes stitched to soil. A boy on a bicycle passed by and asked, "Were they heroes?" Thomas looked at him and nodded slowly. They were brave enough to be forgotten. The boy paused, then pedaled off. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the tracks. A train hadn't run through Wirrabara in years. But if it ever did again, it would pass over the bones of silence and the fire of truth. And somewhere, in the places where the dead still walk, 5 soldiers stood taller. Because finally, someone had remembered their names.